Kia ora. Sorry, everybody. Nothing like a few technical issues to, get the heart racing. But thanks for bearing with us, and apologies for the delay. So kia ora koutou, I'm Anika Forsman. I'm one of the directors for IABC Aotearoa, and it is my pleasure to introduce Andrea Nelson. She has over 20 years experience in the sports and events industry globally here in New Zealand, and was most recently the chief executive of the ICC Women's World Cup, which was really successful event, many hurdles, which I'm sure she'll talk you through today, and in the middle of trying to deliver a major event in a pandemic. I'm surprised you're still standing. And Andrea has led senior marketing comms roles for the London 2012 Olympics and the FIFA Under 20 World Cup, and led the New Zealand Organising Committee for the Rugby League World Cup. So we're really pleased that you've made some time for us today, and look forward to sort of hearing from you. And we've also got Phil Clark, who leads the comms team at Sport New Zealand and was the organisation's former media manager, and he's responsible for the Sport New Zealand Icentia study of gender balance in sports news coverage. And he'll be sharing the latest results of that, as well as talking through the sort of stakeholder engagement approach that using this research, he's being able to work with media and others to keep lifting women's sports coverage. And then Phil has also got 10 years experience in sport, and was previously PR and media manager for the ICC Cricket World Cup 2015. So he knows Andrea. And I had worked with Andrea in a former life as well. So love the small comms village that we have. So I'll throw it over to you. Well, Phil's got a bit of a presentation, and then Andrea, and then we've got a little bit of time, hopefully, for some Q&A. And we will be recording this, so we'll send it out following the webinar. Thanks, Phil.
Cool. Kia ora tātou. So I'm Phil from Sport New Zealand, as introduced, and pleasure to be with you today. I will take you through a bit about this little study of ours, and then share a case study from Andrea's Cricket World Cup as a bit of segue to what she'll say, and then I think we're going to get thrown some questions at the end about women's sport, which we're always happy to talk about, the two of us. So I will dive in. So this is kind of what it's all about, in a sense, is that, there's a lot of amazing things happening in women's sport here and around the world. And one of the challenges we've got is that there just simply aren't enough people watching. So that's kind of the basis behind a lot of the work that we do. Just quickly, for those of you who may not be familiar with Sport New Zealand, we are, as I like to say, the Pluto of the solar system. Some people think we're a planet. Some people think we're not. Some people think we're government. Some people think we're sport. We are a little crown agency. We're in two parts. One is Sport New Zealand, which is about getting everybody active, maximising participation. Then High Performance Sport New Zealand is about winning on the world stage. So I'll tell you a bit about the study of ours. It's been going for 3 years now. It is the most significant study of its kind in the world. There aren't very many studies of gender balance in sports media. They're kind of typically quite awkward and costly things to do. We're quite lucky in New Zealand that the media market is very small, so we can cover a lot with not a massive investment. What it's all about, so there hadn't been a study done in New Zealand for about 10 years, which was done by academics at the University of Auckland. So the first thing for us was just a benchmark. We wanted to understand the extent of balance or imbalance in sports news coverage. We want to be able to track that moving forward. We totally wanted to influence positive change, and that's where the stakeholder engagement comes in, and through that to be able to shift the dial. We didn't want New Zealand to be stagnant. There's obviously a lot of momentum here and around the world with women's sport, so we were expecting and looking for some positive growth in gender balance and coverage. With all this work, not just the study, we're trying to disrupt a virtuous cycle that exists in women's sport, where visibility drives value. And so if you think about it from a sort of microeconomic perspective with the media, the more people that are consuming the media coverage, the more money that will bring in through advertisers, which just fuels the product, right? The more of that there is, the more effort the media will put in. At a system level, same thing happens, but on a bigger scale. The more people that are tuning into broadcast audiences, the more people that are attending matches, the more money flows into the sports and into the environments around the teams. So the more money will go back to the players, the more money will be invested into the product from a match delivery perspective, from a promotional perspective, which makes it more appealing and gives it greater visibility, and around it goes. So with this study, we're trying to disrupt the sort of top right-hand corner of that cycle, and we're trying to disrupt it in other ways through other things we're doing at Sport New Zealand. I'll touch on one of those in a bit later on. Look, I won't bore you with details about the scope. Anyone who knows Isentia knows how they work and how thorough they are. Highlights are, it is around 1/3 of all sports news coverage in New Zealand, so it's randomly selected every day. It's online, it's print, it's TV, it's radio. It is not match broadcasts. That's something that's too big and too hard to do with the money that we've got to pump into this. Print is national and regional, but not community. Like, we're focusing on the media where the media invest their time and effort, because this is ultimately about editorial decision making. We publish one big report a year, so we have published 2 now. The second was in about June or July this year. In addition to that, we are publishing a series of case studies and deep dives. So those are the case studies that we have produced so far. The next one will be on the Com Games. The deep dives are either into media organisations or into sports, and so they're really helpful from a stakeholder engagement perspective. It means, for instance, I can go and sit down with New Zealand Rugby, give them a lot of data around their coverage in the media, different media organisations, different media types, around different events and times of the year, and all of that data helps inform and shape their media engagement strategy. Headline figure from our latest study is this. So we, as of the end of last year, we're at 21%. So just over 1/5 of all our sports news coverage is women's sport, which is an exceptionally good result. The global average is 4%. We were 15% a year ago, so that's an outstanding result. Obviously, we're in a gender balance game, so we're aiming for 50. The reality is that we're only going to get to 50 when the supply side gets sorted out. We need more event delivery to create more coverage. What's particularly encouraging for me at the moment is increasingly we have women's teams in Trans-Tasman competition. So think about the Women's Phoenix team, which is just about to start their second season. Super Rugby Aotearoa last year. We've got ANZ Premiership. We've got Super Smash here in New Zealand. That's the sort of events give you week in, week out coverage. World Cups are amazing. I'll say that again, Andrew. They're amazing. But they're also short-term. So they give you short-term spikes in awareness and coverage. It doesn't necessarily give you sustainable growth the way that those leagues do. This isn't a linear scale, so please don't take it as that. But just to give you a sense of what we kind of look at with the big numbers. So in yellow are the 2-year studies that we've done, so growing from 15% to 21% women's sport. The other numbers are case studies we've done around big events. So that isn't 29% of Paralympics coverage was about female athletes. That number was actually about 76%. That is the proportion of all sports coverage in the event window that is women's sport. So what we're interested in with the big events is the extent to which they shift the dial in all sports coverage. So Paralympics, 29% was encouraging. Olympics at 42 was much bigger because it gets a lot more media attention. So its share of overall media coverage was much bigger. Andrea's World Cup at 33% gives us a kind of baseline for the 3 World Cups. Com Games 30%. That's our latest figure. I was a bit surprised. I thought that might be a bit higher, but just not as strong a media product as the Olympics. This is actually not from the Isentia study. This is from some Gemba research, but I thought I'd chuck it in. This is just, I was fascinated by this, just looking at the extent to which Kiwis are engaging in media coverage, looking at consuming women's sport through the media. So 53% of people have been doing more of it in the last 5 years. Just under that will do more in the next 12 months. So that gives us a lens on what consumers are looking for And when we see our number go from 15 to 21 and half the population want to consume more coverage of women's sport in the media, that's an extremely encouraging thing to see. Now some of the kind of more detailed things. So the first thing we look at is by sport. I won't kind of go through all of those details. This stuff is all on our website. The thing I always look for in this is what's there in burgundy. So that is each sport's share of all sports coverage. So rugby is about 26%. My view on this from a stakeholder engagement perspective is that if we're going to shift the dial, we need to change what's happening in those big three sports. So they are 60% of all the coverage.
Phil, can I ask a question?
Yep, go for it.
If I was writing, for example, a news story about the coach of the All Blacks, it was a news story, not a sports news story. Does that get picked up in this? So when sports becomes mainstream news? Yes,
it's sports wherever it's covered in the media.
Cool.
Those top three sports, 60% of coverage, they only average 11% women's sport. All three of those sports, rugby, cricket, football, have had an increase in their gender balance in the last 12 months, which is really positive. Football's had really big growth, partly off stronger media coverage of the Super Smash, but mainly off Andrea's wonderful World Cup. And I'll come to that in a minute. We've also in year 2 started looking at teams and events, which is just another lens on the top end of town, if you like. Where media are focusing a lot of their effort and resources. So grey is men's coverage, and the orange is females coverage. Not a lot of orange on those two charts. Really interesting though, with teams that the Phoenix is number 3. None of the media expected them to rank that high. And actually, the women's Phoenix team in their first season making a little bit of a dent in there. So that's kind of encouraging. On the right with the events, look, the first and last of those are once every 4 years. So that's a pretty grim picture. It's really just the ANZ Premiership. We absolutely will look at what's happening in the media. So I'll only kind of scratch the surface. So we are tracking the media individually with their gender balance. So average of 21%. Most of them are there or thereabouts. ODT and RNZ have come on top 2 years in a row. NZME is always off the pace. News Hub try really hard, but are off the pace too. So from a stakeholder perspective, you can imagine that they kind of gravitate to numbers like this, and it opens doors to all sorts of interesting conversations. And what I'm always looking to understand is why they are where they are, where they are trying to do more, and what initiatives they've got underway, and what the barriers are that they're facing. So they're always quite fascinating conversations. We also give them breakdowns by media type, so TV versus print. Again, just a bit more granular and fascinating. The other side of it is bylines. This is the most depressing of all the data we kind of look at. It is extremely difficult for media to attract females into sports journalist roles, particularly in print. They have been male-dominated sports rooms for years and years and years, and aren't particularly appealing places to work if you're a young female journalist. It is much easier to attract females into the TV sports news roles. And both 1 and 3 have got about 50% of their teams are female now. But it doesn't necessarily translate into bylines. TV3 is quite interesting because they only have about 2 bylines a night, and they are generally dominated by those big 3 sports. Gender balance of presenters is much better. I'm a little bit cynical about this because they are prepared to put females in those roles in the studio and give them prominence on camera, but not give them the roles in the field covering the news itself. And then that's just an example of what that looks like when you get it into the networks. So again, we get a bit more granular. It kind of sparks more conversation. One thing I'm really interested in with this for next year is to compare their actual performance with bylines, so reporter bylines, against their theoretical result, if you like. So Stuff has got 22 potential bylines in sport. So to have 10% is about right. So they're about where they should be based on the reality of their staff. News Hub is about 5 out of 9. So it should be in the 40s, and it's 5.4. So it's fascinating when you can compare reality with their actual performance. And again, it leads to some interesting conversations. Before I kind of move on, this is quite an important point. A lot of advocates here and around the world will claim that to get more coverage of women's sport, you need more female journalists. We've found the opposite is true. And to be honest, the opposite should be true. They're two different problems. They shouldn't have to be related. And I'll just touch on the stakeholder engagement. I've kind of talked a bit as I went through, but this is my kind of starting point with this. I say this quite a lot. I'm always looking for people who see opportunities in numbers. Some people see those more easily than others. Some people, the more numbers you put in front of them, the more opportunity you find. But that's the philosophy for me that underpins a lot of this work. And this is my model, really. So we are trying to produce as much evidence as we can. That is the numbers to put in front of people. The more that we can produce, the more opportunities there are for stakeholder engagement. We evolve the study every year by just adding new things to it, digging deeper in different areas, and almost without exception, that evolution is fueled by the engagement. Like we're looking at things to answer questions the media have put to us or that sports have put to us. And the more we evolve, the more evidence we get, the more engagement we get, and on and on and on and on it goes. And so ultimately for me, the more conversations that I have, the more change that we can help drive.
Have you had to scale up your team significantly, Phil, to deal with that the increased levels of engagement?
No, and good question. This slide probably answers that, actually. The trick to it is to just, through the case studies and the deep dives and the reports, to get a kind of steady flow of stuff coming out of the study. So I probably do 3 rounds of engagement a year. Like I try not to do that more than that because it becomes a bit too much. Some of the deep dives are just one-on-one conversations with the sport or the media. So really we are doing 1 report a year, maybe a couple of big case studies a year. And so if we can get 3, maybe 4 rounds of consultation, actually that's enough. And because in New Zealand, we've really only got 6 mainstream media outlets. So it's something you can do quite easily in 2 days. And then with the sports, Sport New Zealand invests in 65 sports. Only 46 of those get any media coverage whatsoever. Only about 14 of them have got a comms function. So if you want to talk to someone who manages this, it's a really short list. And then the top 8 are 80% of coverage. And as I said before, the top 3 is 60% of coverage. So it's easier to talk to all the media. It's easier to cover your bases with sports. And then I've got a kind of influence and network that I work with, but most of the movers and shakers, the really influential people in the space, are all part of a reference group that I set up at the start of the study. So actually all 3 of those pots are quite manageable. So it doesn't take a lot of resource. It just is, for me, with the big report once a year, that's kind of almost a second job for about 6 weeks. Before I chat to Andrea, just really quickly, this is moving on from the study. So in our work around value and visibility, we've had the study going for 3 years. We're about to launch an advertising campaign in about 3 days' time, touch wood, it's a bit like the study. It's designed to sort of influence that virtuous cycle and disrupt it and drive more visibility, drive more engagement to inject more value. And so as part of that, we kind of commissioned some research, which is where that media demand stuff came from Gemba. And so just really quickly, I've always focused on the grey parts of these. So this is a survey of about 1,000 members of the New Zealand public. So looking at their behaviours or attitudes towards engaging in women's sport in the last 5 years. So just around about half the population haven't changed in 5 years. And then next up is the next 12 months. So it gets worse. So from our perspective, this was a really powerful moment reading this, because what it said to us is that if we don't move with an intervention, this is not going to change. So it absolutely is time to kind of do something and do something big. This is the last bit of that research I'll show you. This is looking at the barriers to engaging more. And so it differentiates, as you'll see, between the whole population on the left and the middle, those who are consumers of women's sport at the moment. The highlighted barriers are the big ones for us. So knowledge is people don't know the games are on. They don't know who the teams are. They don't know who the players are. Knowing who the players is particularly profound when you're talking about team sports. So in the athletes in New Zealand of either gender with the most awareness and likability are all individual athletes, and they're all Olympic or Paralympic athletes, like Lisa Carrington and Val Adams and Sophie Pascoe. Lydia Ko's the other one. Any female who's in a team sport has got really low awareness, generally speaking. It's amazing to us that one of the barriers is media coverage. Accessibility is largely about broadcast, partly about match availability, mainly about broadcast. So those are the sorts of barriers we're trying to break down at the moment. And this is kind of what it looks like. So we'll launch with 5 sports, big focus on outdoor, different lines that kind of talk to women's sport generally, not necessarily one sport. And this will be in markets, hopefully, on Thursday. And then the last little bit for me is from one of our case studies that Andrea will know very, 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 very well, the ICC Cricket World Cup held in New Zealand earlier this year. So just a couple of slides from this. I said before that during this tournament, 33% of all sports coverage in New Zealand was women's sport. So the tournament, at that point, our baseline was 15. So more than doubled during the tournament window, which shows you the effect of a big women's event like this. This slide just looks at what it did for individual media outlets. So the normal kind of baseline in yellow and the World Cup period on the left. So at a macro level, we've gone from 15 to 33. That World Cup effect is carried through across all major media, which is a really insightful kind of thing for us when we look forward to the Rugby World Cup and the FIFA World Cup next year, and how those things will kind of impact gender balance in sports coverage. And then the last thing from this that I'll show you is kind of less rosy for me. And Andrew and I have kind of talked about this. So this is looking at the players in the tournament that got the most coverage. All the ones in white are the white ferns. So 7 of the top 10 are New Zealanders. And one of those, Lauren Down, didn't actually make the squad. So it's kind of...
She did a lot of media, though, Phil. She did a lot of media.
She did a lot of media.
Because she didn't make the squad.
And so I would always say, look, in my World Cup, if this was in my World Cup, I would be a bit grim about this. Because when you're hosting a World Cup, what you want is the global nature of it to shine through in everything that happens, including with the media. And as a bit of a cricket tragic, when I kind of reflect on who I thought the heroes were of the tournament, a lot of them aren't on this list. And it just says to me that the media didn't really get into that kind of global nature of it. There are a couple of kind of things to be noted about that. One, and Andrew will talk about it, one is that there were significant restrictions around player availability. So it just wasn't easy to access them. That said, what was really clear within about 2 days of the tournament is that I was projecting that we would get 50% women's sport during the window, but I knew within about 2 days we wouldn't, because what you're hoping for is that an outlet like Stuff will be doing, 4 stories a day, and the day after our opening game, it might have been 2 tops. So they weren't doing multiple stories in the lead up, multiple stories on match day, multiple follow-ups the day after. They weren't doing they weren't doing the match day thing that well. So even if they, if they'd done that well, it wouldn't have made a massive difference if you hadn't had the stuff in between with player access, I don't think. But so we'd kind of, I'm a bit glass half empty on this one, but we'll get Andrew's perspective in a minute. And with that image, I shall stop presenting, Andrea, and hand over to you.
Cool. And don't we all just love seeing pictures of Australia win things? I'm going to break it up and attempt to play a quick video to kind of paint a picture, for which I'll talk to it further. So let's see if the technology works, eh?
One hit away. And India, if they lose, they are out.
There is so much riding in this one ball. My knees are shaking right now.
runs away.
3 runs away.
In the air. Catherine has fabulous start in the field. And now South Africa need 3 from 1. A super over is on.
What does that mean? Mobile check. What does that mean? Mobile check.
They're just checking whether Deepti Sharma overstepped or not. There's more drama in this game. It's a no ball. It's a no ball. And with that, all the hearts in India start breaking. This is unbelievable. This game is not done. Still, and a 3-hit ball. It's going to be bowled by Deepti Sharma. The Proteas train continues in this World Cup. They are back to winning ways and go to the semi-final with the second highest chase in World Cup history. And now hearts will be breaking all over India as they are eliminated. South Africa will be cheering this moment. The West Indies will be cheering this moment. They are through to the semi-final, along with England, South Africa and Australia.
I love that video for multiple reasons. A, it gives you a real insight into what World Cups are like, and you can see behind the scenes in the broadcast. But there are 2 big things about that kind of cover the 2 areas I wanted to talk to today. So the first was that was viewed by over 1 billion people, that video. The coverage of this event globally was 50% higher than the most recent Women's World Cup, which was a T20 held in Australia, a much more friendly time zone, and one in which India got to the final. So despite every headwind against the coverage internationally of this event, you saw a massive step forward. And what did that mean? Well, a really practical basis, if you're a cricket nerd, you might have seen the ICC recently re-signed a broadcast deal. For the first time ever, women's sport has been valued separately and purchased separately by an international broadcaster. So what you've actually seen there is an international organisation who valued women's sport, invested in incredibly high-quality broadcast, incredibly high quality, dwarfs anything you normally see in New Zealand, incredibly high-quality venues. No money was skimped in the production of this event to make it truly world-class. And the outcome is they now have a revenue stream from that will start to build the sport sustainably into the future. So that's the first point I wanted to make. And the second was, and so I see you say you felt sick watching this live, that was the last over of the last game of the pool play. And we didn't know who was going to be in the semi-finals until the end of that last ball. You saw there the scenes of the West Indian team celebrating. They had thought they were out. They were going home. We had a flight booked for them that night. They'd done their pre-departure tests already to leave the country. Which brings me to the third thing about that video that I always think is relevant, because we were a tournament that was operating under a COVID shadow. 2 of the players in that room had COVID, that West Indian room. So you saw the hugging and the celebrating. It took on a very different feeling when we got to the semi-final and we realised that one of our teams was likely to be hit very hard. And had they progressed to the final, it would have been challenging. That situation. So look, it's just a really good kind of captures it all video that I like to kind of to kick off with. So I just had a few points really to follow on from Phil's and then open up to any questions. And I guess this is kind of from a comms perspective, and I'm a comms person, even though I'm now a CEO. I started as comms. I started as a journalist. I was one of those women's sports journalists, and I think I got me to do it just because they thought it'd be funny because I didn't know you couldn't throw the ball forward in rugby. So I was really not, I was probably not best in class when I started. But I've worked in sport my whole career, and I guess this event on multiple levels was actually a comms exercise as much as it was a logistical exercise. So the first thing I'd say is that our event, when it first started, was budgeted at the same value as the men's under-19s World Cup, which would have meant that it would have been none of what you would have seen on the screen there would have been able to happen. It would have been a subpar event. And so one of the major communications goals of the tournament initially was to, exactly as Phil illustrated with his virtuous circle, to make sure that our event disrupted that circle and changed the game. And so that meant that we set our vision incredibly ambitiously. So our vision for sports events are usually about staging safe and secure events and, all that sort of stuff. And we went for own the moment and lead the change. That was our organisational vision. And that was backed up by 3 things that we had to do as an organising committee to deliver that, which is awareness and attendance, a great experience for the players, and an amazing experience for people who attended. We'll get back to that, people who attended, because that proved quite challenging. The organisation was structured in a way that set it up for success. It was valued by its partners, and we were able, through an ongoing stakeholder engagement and comms, drive the investment up from New Zealand cricket, from the ICC and from the New Zealand government, to the point where we were able to set the platform we knew would do those athletes proud. One of the big parts of that vision, own the moment and lead the change, when we started, we talked about it being a game-changing event, own the moment and change the game. But what became really clear, and this drove all of our communications, is that the game has changed. People just haven't caught up with the fact that the game has changed yet. And it was our job to show people the product as widely as we could and have it covered as a sports event. So we veered away at all times from any negative or defensive comms about anything. You might have seen, if you ever had the mispleasure of seeing me on the telly, always with a beaming smile, always very positive, whether we were talking about our funding levels, the player standards, or COVID, we had an incredibly positive attitude, and we didn't try and do things that were worthy. So we lent on our partners like Sport New Zealand or others to do things that were, you should be watching this because it's important, that we felt was not our role. Our role was to say, this is going to be awesome. Tune in. And, so the game has changed, became really our philosophy rather than change the game. So that's sort of the women's sport journey of it. I will just also touch on the COVID side because it feels a bit like a trip down a very traumatic kind of what do you have, a night terror attack? But, we did have we got hit pretty hard at every stage of the pandemic. Our tournament was originally scheduled for 2021. When COVID hit, we were very confident we could deliver it in 2021. The New Zealand government were great. We knew we'd be able to make it happen. Ultimately, the decision to postpone it was for cricket. It was for the right reason. It was because the players couldn't prepare. And if you're going to build this amazing stage and platform for everybody, you want them to be doing their best. And in the case of the West Indies, those girls couldn't even muster together because you couldn't travel between islands in the West Indies. And in many of the nations outside of England, Australia and New Zealand, women's cricket just stopped completely. And so these women wouldn't have had a chance to play. So the postponement hit us hard, but we instantly realised that the most important thing was to stay positive and see the best. And we were able to secure some real opportunities from that postponement. We were able to do more engagement, get more creative, get more funding, just keep going and doing. For example, we embraced Te Reo for the first time for a sports event. That was because of the postponement. We produced an education program in Te Reo used for kura kaupapa. We integrated it into our sports presentation. So a whole lot of stuff we wouldn't have been able to do. But then things were looking pretty good and we thought this is going to happen. We got our MIQ rooms and we thought, I think we're going to be all right. And then I sat down on the couch one night in December last year with a glass of wine and said, look, I think we're looking pretty good now. And there was an item on Twitter saying Omicron there's a new variant in South Africa. And from that moment onwards, we were day by day facing an existential crisis for our event. We had everything in terms of contingency plans, and I'll just rattle off a few so you get a sense of it. We had a plan for 14 days MIQ, 10 days MIQ, Trans-Tasman bubble, so only MIQing some people, 7 days MIQ, then we went back up to 10, and then while our teams were in MIQ, it dropped back down to 7 again. So we had to, we basically ended up extending our event by 3 weeks in order to bring people into the country with enough window to cover any potential changes and then ensure that they could prepare. We had existential threats like, for example, if being on a plane with someone else who has COVID, makes you a close contact and you have to isolate, you can't fly anyone anywhere. We had to get private planes for our tournament. That was actually something we had to do because of the close contact rules, rather than for any other reason. We had to book our entire hotel rooms. We had to build basically a bubble. Then the players said, don't really want to do that. So then we had to find a way to get the players on the plane to New Zealand to enjoy their experience. And then finally, and I guess this is the one where comms really played a massive role, was the attendance. So we had great visions of amazing match day experiences. We had free childcare, trampoline parks, a wine village for the mums. It was going to be epic. And we were selling really well. We were on track to have several sold out matches. When it became clear that we were going to be in the middle of an Omicron outbreak, and I do remember meeting the lovely Deputy Prime Minister who told me that if you just followed the track of the Omicron wave, it was likely to be peaking in each city we were in when we were in it. So it started in the north and it moved south, and so did we. So it peaked in Christchurch on the day of our final. So we really had a massive level of change to contend with, and it became quite controversial around attendance. And you might remember Super Rugby talking quite loudly about it in the media. And, we realised quite early on that trying to lobby and politically bully people into doing things wasn't going to get us anywhere. So what we actually did is we went to the medical officers of health in each region and talked to them directly. And we showed them pictures of cricket matches. And we said, look, when you go to the cricket and it's a grass bank, do you sit next to the person there, or do you leave some space so you can spread out your blanket? And everyone saw instantly that if you were looking at a non-sold out venue, you didn't need to be operating with pods of 100 and separated areas. You could just get a percentage attendance. That made a massive difference for us because we started at 10%. We went to 20% in time for the Basin Reserve match, New Zealand-Australia, which was hit by the protesters who had just moved out of Parliament that day. But also... Phil, I think it's safe to say 20%. It looked a little more than that, but I can assure you it definitely was 20%. And then finally, the great news 1 week out from our final that we were able to have a full crowd. And then suddenly all the work and all the effort we'd put into coverage and everything in order to build the excitement was needed, because that final didn't have New Zealand in it. It was an England-Australia final. But God bless the people of Canterbury. They came out and supported it, and it was a beautiful day, and one that achieved all of the aims of the tournament as much as it could have in that environment. So I guess the big lessons for me, just to wrap up on that, from a communications perspective, was the power of positivity was absolutely, in my opinion, the difference between our tournament succeeding and failing. And the second thing was the power of partnership. So we worked incredibly closely with our partners. We didn't have any them and us. Not with our venues, not with government, not with ICC. It was an inclusive approach. And when the crap hit the fan, that was what got us through. So I guess that's just a really high-level summary from me. Anything else, Monika?
Wow, amazing. Oh, yeah. I mean, it was a hugely successful event given everything thrown against you. So congratulations. And, fantastic to see that balance of coverage. Like, it just really highlights how these World Cups are, I guess, playing such a key role in helping lift the profile for women's sport. So we've still got 7 minutes, so we'll have a bit of time for Q&A. So I've got a couple of questions I'm keen to ask, and I see I've got a couple that have come through on the chat. So if anyone has questions, if they just want to put them in the chat, and then I can ask Andrew and Phil while they're here. So I guess I'm keen to know where do you think things are going from here for women's sport and coverage? Like, what happens once New Zealand's not hosting these World Cups? How do you keep that momentum?
I'll jump in first, Phil, and then you can talk maybe from your perspective. But I'd say, to me, the only way is up, so it will go up. But I think the biggest lesson from me, and one that really, I think, as time has passed from our World Cup, is the most relevant, is structure is the most important thing. If you don't, structurally, you have to value your product. If you're delivering a women's event, World Cup or tournament or whatever it may be, at a subpar venue with subpar preparation, and subpar coverage, you will continue the cycle of subpar. You will not get the critical change. If you deliver your event in the best venue with the best preparation and the best coverage, you are making that change. And I think if we scan across sports at the moment, even the 3 World Cups, actually, there's a very different positioning of those 3 World Cups within the organisations that are hosting them. And I'm not going to get into any specifics, but I think you can see for yourself, and similarly with other codes. And some do it really well, some less so, but ultimately you have to genuinely value it, and you have to have a structure that allows it to succeed.
Cool. And then for me, look, I didn't show this, but there is a chart from the study which shows the gender balance in each month of the study, year on year. And what we kind of saw in the second year was that the peaks were bigger than the first year, but the troughs were bigger too. And what that tells us is that the growth we're seeing is not being driven by event spikes. It's underlying improvement. So for me, if you took out those 3 World Cups, we'd still be heading in the right direction. At a macro level, as most people would see, there is a tremendous amount of momentum in New Zealand and around the world with women's sport. If you look at what's happened in Andrea's tournament, what we saw in the Euro Football Championships recently, seeing Barcelona fill out the Camp Nou, those are massive things that are happening. And so we're just part of this global tidal wave.
But what I would say is very interesting is that if you look at who's in the finals of these tournaments or these events, they are teams that have invested in professional women's sport.
Yes.
So you cannot play lip service to this. You know, there's a reason why England and Australia were in the finals of our tournament. They were always going to be if it went on the level of investment from the nations.
Interesting. Thank you. Probably one for you, Phil. Why do you think New Zealand has such a? I mean, you talked about it in your presentation, but you know, why is the rest of the world just so rubbish? I guess at covering women's sport.
Well, in all fairness, the first thing I probably should say is the old maxim that if you measure it, you can change it. And so we've got the benefit of having not just a recent study and a good study, but an ongoing study. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the 4% global figure is about 8 years old. So the current figure might be a bit better than that if someone would be bothered to do it, right? So there is having a current study helps. Having a live study helps a lot. I would never underestimate the value in someone like me having a conversation with sports media 3 or 4 times a year. Like, they're engaged in the study, and there's no doubt that it drives them forward a bit. You know, none of them want to be the worst performer. They want to see their numbers heading in the right direction. So it helps just maintains the visibility of the issue. But certainly behind all of that, I just think it's just about who we are as Kiwis. Like, we want to do the right thing. We're progressive and we're fair, and we've also got really good product. And I think, but Andrew's point's spot on, right? The better the product gets, the more appealing it is.
Yeah, I think we have more work to do. And I actually think if you look granularly, there are many nations who are much better than us, as well as many nations that are much worse.
Well, I spent some time in Australia getting COVID ultimately a couple of months ago. And I met with a lot of the sports, and I met with some of the media. And what was really clear from like that country is that they've got commercial strength that we would envy, right? There's a lot of wealth in sport in Australia. So they set up the women's leagues much earlier than we do. They've got a much stronger product than we've got, but the gender balance in media is light years behind ours. So despite the less investment than the Aussies, we were still punching above our weight with coverage.
Nice. So I'll go to the chat. So we've got a question: how do you get through the power brokers that women's sport? Through to the power brokers that women's sport is an
equally
quality product when some of those organisations don't seem to value women participation at board level or exec level.
Oh, who are you talking about?
Even taking a financial hit for it.
Yeah, I'll pick this one up. I have to pay tribute to Phil's boss. I believe genuinely that Grant Robertson has single-handedly changed the game for sport in New Zealand for generations through the quota system, controversially, which I always in my life would have massively disagreed with, but I've totally converted to the quota system for sports governance. Yes, you've got one organisation quite high profile who haven't met that, but everybody else has. I'm the chair of Northern Region Football in my spare time. I ended up on that board, to be honest, as part of a probably because they wanted a chick on the board to get ahead of things. And, the value and the change and the level of governance and the discussions around the table by having gender equity in my lifetime of that organisation, unrecognisable, because you've got people who are focused on other areas, not just Prem players who want to make sure that the top men's teams have a great time, And if you don't have the diversity of thought at the board level, nothing else will happen. So I think we're doing the right things, and to answer that question, there just maybe some who take a little longer.
Yeah, and when Minister Robertson came into power, I mean, he came out straight away and said that women and girls was his number one priority for sport. We had the government strategy for women and girls in sport ready within about 8 months. The study that I presented is one of 24 commitments in that. The advertising campaign is another one. So there's 22 other things we've done in the last 3 years, some around value and visibility, some around leadership, like the governance target Andrew spoke about, other things around participation. So we've got a system-wide focus on improving gender representation in sport.
And I'll throw in one more. This one has come in from Jamie. You mentioned comms not being worthy, and how do we move women's sports coverage away from worthiness?
Yeah, look, I think there's just a real and I'm not sure Phil and I agree on this, so I'll say my bit first. I think there's a real temptation sometimes we all know that people should be paying attention to this and there should be more coverage, but you don't convince people by telling them that they should do something about anything, right? Like, it isn't how human brains work. You have to create a sense of, a desirable product, and you have to educate people about it and get them excited about it. And you can only achieve that by focusing on the positive. And there is a temptation, and there's many people in women's sport who disagree with me, and things, you quite often see stunts or ideas around kind of highlighting inequality, and there's a place for that, but that's not the place of the promoter. The promoter should absolutely be selling, the quality product. And ultimately, for me, the success of that, Jamie, is where the young boy says, Sophie Devine is my favourite batter, right? That's not because he's been told he should like women's cricket. It's because he's seen Sophie Devine hit some amazing sixes. And that's where you've succeeded.
Yeah, and I think, look, for me, I don't know if we do disagree, to be honest. I mean, the conversations that I have are all positive and open. So a lot of effort went into creating a safe environment around the study with media. I didn't want them to see it as a stick that we were looking to whack them with. And so really it is about having kind of safe, open, gentle conversations around, what they're doing to try, how much coverage they're doing for women's sport and where there's opportunity and where there's barriers. And a lot of it, to be honest, one of my favourite examples is the Super Smash. We did one of the first case studies we did, and it's a perfect case study because they're all double headers on the same day. And it's an awful case study because it's not a priority for any media. But within 3 years, the women's sport proportion went 20%, 23%, 50%, or 49%. And a lot of that was because Spark got the broadcast rights and they broadcast more games, which meant the media could watch and cover more of it without going to a fixture. But the study kind of got under the skin a little bit of stuff. So stuff is about 40% of sports media coverage. It's more than that with cricket. And what I found with them was that they were doing like column brief match reports, and they would just talk about the men's game. And it was just about saying, gently kind of inquiring why you couldn't just put both fixtures in the same summary. And that just sort of, that just got them thinking. And that thought led to different action. So it didn't have to start with negative words, and it didn't have to start with criticism. It was open, it was positive, and it just led to constructive conversation. So,
and Jamie, you've raised the example of the Mankad controversy, which is, for those that don't know, I mean, this is cricket gold. India won a series against England with a Mankad, which is when the bowler flicks the wicket when the batter is out of their crease. So it's considered unsportsmanlike behaviour, and it was hugely controversial. The reason why that got coverage is because the pictures were amazing. And the pictures were amazing because someone had spent the money to ensure they were playing at a good venue, and there was a good camera crew, and there was a camera there at that location, and that created the moment that had the that has had the talkability. If that had been a one camera shot from behind at a crappy Eden Park 2 kind of ground, that moment would not have had the global resonance it did. So I'd kind of go back to that original point about you've got to invest in the product in order to have it succeed.
Thank you. I'm mindful of time. I think there are a few more questions that we haven't responded to. Maybe we'll do one more because we've still got the captive audience. No one's dropped off yet, so that's a good sign. I'll ask one from Jackie. She wants to know, has the change in viewing habits affected the coverage aspect, like the rise of streaming versus terrestrial viewing?
Certainly from the promoter it has. So we probably invested 3 or 4 times the amount of previous World Cups on our digital coverage. And the ICC flew in around 100 people, I think, directly in order to do that. Or no, they didn't in the end because we didn't get the MIQ rooms, but it was a big crew. It was a big crew. That was to reflect the fact, with our time zones, most people didn't watch our tournament live. So the big numbers for our tournament were streaming and video on demand.
Yeah, and look, the research that we did for the campaign with Gimba, what we found with kind of engagement, sources of engagement, there's certainly pretty even balance between who's doing Sky traditionally and who's streaming. YouTube is really, really high. Traditional media is still quite strong, but so you can see the way that the options for engagement shape behaviour. And also, thing to note is that that social media is now a subset of broadcast to a certain extent. With an event like Andrea's, you can be getting match highlights, wicket highlights, live scoring all through social media. So it's, it's a lot of flexibility these days.
Cool. All right. Well, I will leave it there. I feel like I could definitely go on all afternoon, but thank you so much for your time today, Phil and Andrea. And really appreciate it. And, I think as comms people, we can keep doing our bit to support and watch and get jobs in sports. So thank you so much. And
you can all do is buy tickets to the Rugby World Cup. It starts on the 8th of October. Tickets start from $5. We've got to sell out Eden Park. We're talking about vision. We're trying to convince people to change the game. In some sports, this would be a really good way to show them how good it can be.
100%. It's going to be fantastic. I'm looking forward to it. And FIFA next year. Can't wait. Awesome. All right. Well, I'll close it out. So thank you so much. And we'll send the recording out following this. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.